So as you might expect, there's going to be a fair number of spoilers in this video, so if you haven't watched the most recent episode of Game of Thrones, then don't bother, it's kind of bad. So I guess I'm talking about Game of Thrones then. I never really thought I would talk about Game of Thrones in any way, because it's just one of those things that, like, everybody talks about, but this season has been so bad in general that you kinda have to, you know? And I thought the right thing to talk about here would be Cleganebowl. For those of you who don't know, Cleganebowl is the thing where the Hound and the Mountain, Sandor and Gregor Clegane, fight. And it's meant to be this big hype event that you're like super excited to see, like, oh my god, Cleganebowl is finally happening! But then when it actually comes, it's... which kind of sums up a lot of this season of Game of Thrones, doesn't it? Oh my god, the Night King and the White Walkers are finally here! Oh no, they are dead. It's over. Glad we wasted all this time building them up as the most impossible threat that anyone was ever going to deal with. Ever. I see you, Frank. I see you. Hi. Hi. He has several strong opinions about Game of Thrones. Cleganebowl has been kind of built up to this whole time, in that the Hound and the Mountain are both characters who exist and they both don't like each other, which in Game of Thrones naturally means at some point they're eventually going to fight to the death. But then once you got to the actual fight itself between them, it was really dull and not very good. You know, just they kind of swung their swords at each other for a bit. The Mountain lost his stupid helmet and we saw, oh my god, he's a zombie, which we've known he was for the past, 3 seasons? And then they jumped through a wall, the end. It's not even disappointing, because I had no expectations for Cleganebowl to ever be good, because ever since the Mountain became a zombie, he has had no personality. There's no catharsis in killing him now. The whole thing of his character is just kind of pointless. It doesn't work. And so I got to thinking, in what ways could Cleganebowl have worked? And I've come up with 3 possibilities. The first is that you give the Mountain a personality again. You know, even though he's been brought back from the dead or whatever, you could still retain some of what he had early on, where even though all his personality was, he is a dude who really likes to kill things, you could have still kept that and had something. So the Hound isn't just fighting against a thing that is no longer his brother. There could have been some actual catharsis for the Hound there. But the second one is that the two of them start fighting, and then Arya would come back and save the Hound. Because what feels like the whole point of the Hound and Arya's arc is to learn that violence and revenge doesn't work, or isn't helpful, will bring you no joy. And they kind of try to do that by having the Hound go to Arya, go girl, don't be like me, don't seek revenge. But it doesn't work when the Hound then goes to seek his revenge. And also at this point, you've got to remember that Arya has had more successful revenge than the Hound has, given that she turned Walder Frey's kids into a pie and made him eat them. Like, if anyone is the one who knows whether or not revenge will bring you catharsis, it's her. So she should be the one going to the Hound and telling him, don't do this, it isn't worth it, you'll die and you'll get nothing out of it. And the Hound could have escaped, and who cares if the Mountain dies or not? It doesn't matter. And my third one is that Cleganebowl doesn't happen at all. No Cleganebowl. The Mountain would have died of his injuries that he received in Season 4, never get brought back as a zombie, and somewhere along the line, the Hound would discover this. He would learn that his brother had died, and he wasn't there to see it. And then he would have this moment of realization, like, oh, everything that I have been fighting for this whole time, what has kept me going was my hatred of my brother and my desire for revenge. And without that, there's nothing. So maybe I've been kind of wasting my life doing this, and the Hound could actually get to be content and happy and actually live a life now. See, both the second and the third one of these that I've suggested are actually resulting in some kind of character arc for the Hound, which, would be nice, given that in the show he's ended up having no character arc. He's just been an angry, violent dude who remains angry and violent until the end, and that's it. When it clearly was building up to him not having Cleganebowl, but for whatever reason, the creators of the show decided, no, people really want to see Cleganebowl, even though when people were kind of talking about Cleganebowl, it was mostly a joke. People didn't actually want to see it because what is there to see? And that kind of sums up a lot of the attitude towards this season, is it feels like everything's been put there to either placate the fans or to subvert their expectations. And when that's all you're building a story around, it doesn't work. It feels like the plot is driving the characters places rather than the characters driving the plot, which is more interesting. If you want to see a show where the characters are what is driving the plot, I would recommend watching something like Better Call Saul, where everything in that is down to the characters' decisions, and it feels like the characters are the ones that are making the plot happen, not the other way around. Whereas in Game of Thrones, it just kind of feels like, okay, we need to have this thing happen in the final episode, so therefore, suddenly this week Daenerys will lose her mind and kill thousands of innocent people, even though the build-up to that has been negligible. There wasn't no build-up to it, but they didn't build up to it very well. And that is, in a nutshell, Cleganebowl. Because there's been some kinds of hints that this kind of thing is going to happen, but ultimately, before this fight, what we have seen of the Hound and the Mountain together, they have had maybe about 3 scenes before this, if I'm being generous. I don't even really remember most of their time together. They are 2 characters who have been apart for the majority of the show. And the Hound is an actually interesting character. The Mountain is just kind of a big angry dude, or 3 big angry dudes if we go by the number of actors who've played him. And so, without the 2 of them having a clear kind of on-screen relationship, other than we know they're brothers because the show has told us so, there's nothing there that we want to see for when they meet up. This isn't like these are 2 characters who feel like they have a long history because we've never seen any of their history. It's all just a bit pointless, really. Game of Thrones, Season 8. So yeah, I didn't like Cleganebowl. I knew I would never like Cleganebowl. The show should not have done Cleganebowl. So now there's only 1 episode of Game of Thrones left. I'm sure it's going to be an utter disaster. I just want this thing to end. Thank you for watching. Be sure to let me know what you think of Season 8 of Game of Thrones in the comments below. Isn't it dreadful? Click up here to subscribe and click over here for more videos by me. I would particularly like if you click the one up here. That is my new video all about the movie Pan. I worked really hard on it and I'm very tired. Also, Patreon is in the description, sure.